it's Tori, and today I'm going to be discussing my December wrap-up. As you can tell from the thumbnail, I had 4 5-star reads this month out of 5 reads total, so really good reading month for me. Unfortunately, I did not read all of my books for my Books to Books challenge. I have one that I did not get to, which was The Hazelwood by Melissa Albert. Okay, sorry if the angle changed. My phone decided to have a little freak out. Anyway, continuing on with what I was saying, I did not finish The Hazelwood, but I put the card back in my Books to Books TBR, so I will get to it eventually. I just didn't have enough time. I also mentioned in my goals wrap up for 2020 that I only had Julius Caesar left to read by William Shakespeare to reach all of my goals, and I did not get to it. So I'm not too mad about it because I was in a weird reading slump that I kind of came out of at the end of November, but I still was in it, plus I was just really busy, busier than I expected to be. So anyway, didn't get to that one, and that's okay because I had an amazing reading month anyway, and you know, I'll get to Julius Caesar eventually. So let's just get right into the books. So starting with my 1 4-star read of the month, we have The Hunchback of Notre Dame by Victor Hugo. I listened to this on audiobook and I, like I said, gave it 4 out of 5 stars. I really enjoyed this. Some things that bothered me to start off with was, first of all, I knew going into this that there were a lot of like essay portions regarding architecture and things of that nature. And while I did enjoy those portions more than I expected to, like I found a lot of interest in those sections, I felt like they were very redundant, like they were very repetitive about the points they were making. And I know a lot of essays are kind of supposed to be like that, but it just grates on me whenever I read an essay that I feel like just is saying the same thing over and over, just providing more and more evidence, which again, that's what essays are supposed to do, but I don't like reading that. So after a while it gets old. So anyway, but this was still overall good. The other thing I did not like about it was Esmeralda as a character. She's technically supposed to be the main character in many ways. Not main, I guess technically the Hunchback of the title should be the main character, but she's very much what the plot is focused around. And I just found her to be very naive, and I felt like she didn't develop as a character at all. So she sort of reminded me a little bit of Fantine from Les Mis. However, Fantine, I feel like, grows throughout the story. She develops, she becomes less naive, more understanding of the world she's in, and she's still very independent and just continues to grow in that independence, mostly because she has to, but I find her to be a very interesting character because of that growth she goes through, whereas Esmeralda in this, though she starts off being kind of a similar personality, she never really changes, and I just really didn't like that. So those were a couple things that kept it from being a 5-star read. However, I really loved Quasimodo as a character. I thought he was so sweet. There were so many moments listening to it that I just was like, oh, because my heart just broke for him, and I really enjoyed that part of the story. I also found Frollo, even though he's terrifying and I would never ever want to see him, to be very interesting. And the plot itself was very fun to go through, especially having only experienced the stage musical and the Disney movie. It was just very different from either of those. Even the stage musical, which definitely is closer to this as far as plot goes, it's still very different. In fact, one of the biggest differences for those who have only watched those adaptations like me, or even just watched the Disney movie, is Phoebus is made out to look like this great guy in those that loves Esmeralda back and they have this great romance. In this, he's trash and only wants to get with her for sex, and the love is very much only on her side. It's kind of just really tragic, and he's awful. So that was really a surprise for me. It was really good overall. I'm glad I read it, and it's one I'll definitely reread in the future, but again, it was just not quite a 5-star read for me. Okay, and then getting into all my 5-star reads, starting with Inkspell by Cornelia Funke. I'm sorry, all these shiny covers are just glowing with the lighting, the way it's set up, but anyway, I ended up giving this, like I said, 5 out of 5 stars. It's just so good, and I loved it honestly even more than the first book in the series, Inkheart, which I also gave 5 stars, but that one is a little bit slower plot wise, and this one also has a lot more magic in it. We get a lot more character development, relationship development, and I love Dustfinger so much. He has to be one of my favorite characters of all time. He's just a great anti-hero, and there was an event at the end of this book that I actually remembered happening, but I did not remember correctly how it happened. I don't know if you've ever experienced this, but there have been several times where there's books I read in my childhood where I remember a specific scene, and I feel like I remember it very vividly, but then I go back in and I realize that wasn't the scene at all, that wasn't a thing, and so that kind of was my experience reading this. I remembered this big plot twist happened, but the way I remember it happening was not at all like how it actually happened, so that was fun to be surprised that way, and I actually really liked the way it was done in reality versus what I remembered much better. So anyway, this was really, really, really good, and for all those who are considering rereading this or reading this because of how much I've talked about it, definitely do, because it's such a good series, and the sequel even better than the first one, and I could just gush about it all the time. I won't, but I could. The next book I completed was Beartown by Fredrik, Backman, and I ended up also giving this 5 out of 5 stars. Another amazing one that I could just gush about. This follows a small town in Sweden that they're obsessed with hockey, and they finally have a hockey team that's really gonna put them on the map. Their economy's failing, so they're really relying on this hockey team that's coming up in the ranks, and they end up winning the semifinals. However, that night at a party, the star player of this team ends up raping a girl in the town, and we see the fallout from that. Yes, like I said, it's halfway through the book. However, there's a lot of heavy foreshadowing throughout the first half, and every synopsis I've seen mentions it, and I feel like going into it knowing it's not till halfway through the book, but the first part is very important build up to get there, to introduce you to all these different characters. We're following so many different perspectives, and you're able to get a sense of how this town works and how people relate to each other and how they're all having their own struggles, and there's a lot more to this story than just the rape. So I feel like even though it happens halfway through the book, it's not a complete spoiler because it does foreshadow it heavily to the point where you have to know what's going to happen, or at least have an idea. And there's a lot more to the story than just that. There's more to the build-up than just that. So anyway, really, really good story. I loved the way Fredrik Backman introduced us to so many different perspectives, including perspectives you might not consider being important that really are, and different people handle the situation in different ways. Some are very good at handling it, some do not handle it well at all. Some start off not handling it well, and then they realize they need to step up, and they do, and it's just these great tear-jerking moments, and it's just so great. I will say the writing is such that I know a lot of people might not love it, and that's totally fair. For me, I felt like the way the writing was done made it possible for me to really get to know all these characters, especially since there are so many. I felt like it really opened my eyes to all the perspectives and helped me see them as real people rather than just players in this game, especially since this book was only, at least my copy was only just over 400 pages. With that many perspectives, it's really hard to really bring them all to life and make you care about all of them, but I felt like based on the writing style and just how the book was set up, it really made for really good reading, really good character development, and I just loved it, and think you should read it if you want to. I will mention, however, just trigger warnings like I mentioned. There's rape in here, there's also other kinds of abuse, bullying, homophobia, and also some suicidal thoughts and things like that. So if any of that is triggering to you, or it's just something you prefer to avoid reading for other reasons, just be aware of that. I feel like it's all handled very well, but it is in there, so just keep that in mind. Oh, also some racist comments as well is in there, so yeah, keep that in mind as well. But anyway, it's so good, and I immediately ordered the sequel right after I finished this because I want to get to it as soon as I possibly can. Okay, and then that very same day I read my third 5-star read of the month, and that was Elizabeth Gaskell's Wives and Daughters. Wow, that was rough to get out, but anyway, I completed this the same day I completed Beartown, and also, like I said, gave it 5 out of 5 stars. This is actually probably a new favorite classic of all time. In fact, it might even be in my top 5 favorite books of all time. Like, that's how much I loved this book. This book basically follows Molly Gibson and her father. Her mother died when she was very young, and she's reaching the age where men are starting to notice her, and her dad realizes this and decides maybe I need to give her a role model. So he kind of on a whim ends up marrying this woman in the town who has a daughter of her own, and they become this blended family, and we get to see them and all their shenanigans and everything going on with that. And then we also followed the Hamley family a little bit. The Hamley family, that was fun. Who are neighbors to these girls, and they have 2 sons, and kind of they get entwined as well. It's really, really, really well written, just so interesting. The character development in this is so incredible. I absolutely love learning about Squire Hamley, Mr. Gibson, Mrs. Gibson, and all her dramatics, Cynthia and Molly, and they're just all so real feeling. I just absolutely love the way Elizabeth Gaskell brought them to life in this book. And I honestly would say it's probably about on the same level as Agnes Grey, and many of you know Agnes Grey by Anne Bronte is like my 3rd or 4th favorite book of all time. I can't figure out where to place it exactly, but it's one of my favorite books of all time. I read it earlier this year, and I loved it because I connected to Agnes Grey as a character so much. And I would say this is on the same level because I connected with Molly, but not as much as Agnes, so I almost put Agnes Grey above this. However, I feel like the plot and the side characters in this are much better developed, so I feel like because I connect with Agnes Grey better as a character, I really, really like that. But this one I feel like has better other character development and a better plot, so it kind of balances out to where they're probably on the same level. And it's just so good. I'm so glad I read it. And Elizabeth Gaskell has every opportunity right now to become a favorite author of mine. I just love this. And later this year I plan on reading North and South, so I'm excited to do that. Yeah, I just feel like her writing is so approachable, and like I said, I just love the characters in this. And even though it's a very simple story, I feel like there's just a lot of depth to the relationships that are portrayed in this book, and I'm really sad we don't have that last chapter that would have wrapped everything up, but I was satisfied with the ending because it's very, very clear where she wanted it to end up. In fact, there's a note by the editor at the end that mentions exactly what Elizabeth Gaskell, as far as they knew, was planning, and so he's able to describe basically how it was going to end, and I really appreciated that. So anyway, very good. It's just so good. Okay, and then the final book I completed this month was The Five by Hallie Rubenhold, which again gave 5 out of 5 stars. This was my 4th 5 out of 5 star read for the month, and it was so good. Full disclosure, I technically finished this the 1st of January, but I already knew I was gonna give it 5 stars on the 31st, and so I just decided on Goodreads to mark it as completed so it could be counted in my 2020 reads, and just gave it 5 stars even though I just had a little bit left to listen to that I wasn't able to on the 31st. So anyway, here's another gush fest. I just really enjoyed this. This follows the lives of the women who were killed by Jack the Ripper back in the late 1800s, and it just explores everything they went through as far as we know. Unfortunately, the last of the victims we know very little about, which I found very sad, but I felt like she was able to bring to life the Victorian time period and discuss a lot of the societal issues that were common back then, especially regarding the position of women, especially lower class women who had so few opportunities and really could only be considered a good woman if they were married. Like, there was just really nothing much they can do, and this really went into that and described just so many horrors that a lot of lower class people in general had to face, and it was so well written and really fascinating to read, especially in association with literature written at that time period. It was very interesting to think about all these movements that were starting to happen already at this point but had not really gained traction yet. A lot of what we know about these murders comes through the lens of Victorian society and their morals, to the point where even today we forget about the victims. And I just really loved how Hallie Rubenhold approached this topic and approached these women and recognized these are real people and we need to be aware of their stories because they had lives. And I'm always a fan whenever I read anything or watch anything or listen to anything that has to do with true crime. I love people who really focus on the victims and recognize that they're real people and don't try to focus quite so much on the murderers themselves, especially with serial killers. It's common to kind of make the serial killer legendary and to forget about the people they killed. So I really appreciated this book for that reason. And also, like I said, the glimpse into Victorian life for the lower classes, for women in the lower classes, was just wonderful. It was wonderfully written and wonderfully researched, and I felt like even though she didn't know everything, she made it clear she didn't know everything, but she gave an idea of what potentially they could have been thinking or they could have been feeling at different points due to their circumstances. And we'll never really know, but it really brought these women to life in a wonderful way. And I highly recommend it. It's not even very long of a book. I think the audiobook was only like 10 hours, so not bad at all, and it was just so worth it. So anyway, definitely a favorite of the year. In fact, I'm going to be doing my favorite books of the year pretty soon, and let's just say 4 out of the 5 of these will probably be on that list. But anyway, they're all just so good, and I'm so glad my final month of 2020 was such a good reading month, because it really was, and it really just kicked me right out of that reading slump. I'm so not in that anymore. And in fact, the book I'm currently reading is Frenchman's Creek by Daphne du Maurier, and I am already in love with that one too. So we might be starting off the year on a very much book reading high, and I'm so down for it. So anyway, let me know down below some books you read in December, some books you were excited about, if you've read any of these and your thoughts on them. And yeah, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time. Bye!